In 1584, under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, England began expanding its explorations and colonial ambitions in the Americas. The objective was to establish strategic settlements that would strengthen England's influence, expand trade, and counter the dominance of rival maritime powers, particularly Spain. Within this context, the coast of present-day North Carolina was selected as a promising location for a permanent colony. In 1585, the first group of settlers was dispatched to Roanoke Island. That initial attempt failed due to food shortages and conflicts with local Native American tribes. However, the project was not abandoned. In 1587, a second group of 115 settlers was organized, consisting of men, women, and children. John White, an experienced artist and explorer, was appointed governor. The expedition's goal was not only to establish a permanent settlement, but also to strengthen England's military and economic presence in the New World. Among the settlers were White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, and his granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. The settlers had originally planned to settle in the Chesapeake Bay area, but for reasons that remain debated, including disagreements among the ship's crew, they ended up establishing themselves on Roanoke Island instead. From the outset, the settlement faced serious challenges: limited supplies, inadequate agricultural output in the unfamiliar environment, and strained relations with several local tribes, made worse by hostilities stemming from earlier English expeditions. Facing the risk of starvation and unable to secure enough resources locally, Governor White decided to return to England to seek reinforcements and supplies. His plan was to return within a few months. That plan collapsed almost immediately. Upon White's arrival in England, war broke out between England and Spain, culminating in the Spanish Armada's attempted invasion in 1588. Every available ship was requisitioned for military use, and civilian voyages across the Atlantic were suspended. White was stranded in England for more than 3 years. In August 1590, with the war over, he was finally able to sail back to Roanoke. When he arrived, the settlement was deserted. There were no signs of a large-scale battle, no human remains, no evidence of bloodshed, and no household belongings left in disarray. The only clues were the word Croatoan carved into a wooden post and the letters Crow carved into a nearby tree. Croatoan was the name of an island to the south, home to a Native American tribe known to have had relatively peaceful relations with the English. Aside from these carvings, there were no direct indications of where the settlers had gone or what had happened to them. Based on the available evidence, 3 main theories emerged almost immediately. First, that the settlers had relocated to Croatoan Island or another area and assimilated into native communities. Second, that they had been attacked and wiped out by hostile forces. And third, that they had abandoned the island in search of food or safer conditions. The detail that all of the houses had been dismantled in an orderly fashion suggested a planned relocation rather than a sudden evacuation under attack. However, no archaeological or documentary evidence from the period has been found to confirm any of these possibilities. After that single visit, John White never returned to Roanoke. English records from the period provide no additional information, and later accounts remained speculative at best. From a historian's perspective, the disappearance of the Roanoke colony represents a blind spot in the historical record, a gap so wide that every interpretation rests on conjecture and the piecing together of scattered, indirect clues. This absence of definitive evidence is precisely what has allowed the mystery to persist for more than 4 centuries, making Roanoke one of the most enduring unsolved events in early American history. When the deserted state of the Roanoke settlement was discovered in August 1590, explanations for the fate of its 115 settlers began to take shape. More than 4 centuries later, 3 principal theories remain at the center of scholarly debate. The first theory, assimilation into native communities. The most widely considered possibility is that the colonists relocated to Croatoan Island or nearby areas and integrated into local Native American tribes. This idea is supported by 2 main points. First, historical records indicate that some of the Roanoke settlers maintained relatively peaceful relations with the Croatoan tribe. Second, the word Croatoan carved into a post could have served as a deliberate message indicating their destination. Later English accounts mention encounters with native individuals who displayed physical traits suggesting European ancestry, leading some to speculate they were descendants of the Roanoke settlers. However, this theory suffers from a major weakness: the absence of direct archaeological or anthropological evidence. Excavations on Croatoan Island have not produced artifacts of English origin from the correct time period, and modern genetic testing has yet to yield any conclusive links. The second theory, attack and annihilation. Another possibility is that the colonists were attacked and wiped out by a hostile group, either a rival native tribe or a foreign European power operating in the region. The late 16th century was a period of intense intertribal conflict in the coastal areas of what is now North Carolina, and the region was also subject to competition between European nations, notably Spain and France. Given that Roanoke was an isolated and poorly defended settlement, it could have been a vulnerable target. The strength of this theory lies in its compatibility with the political and military climate of the time. However, it faces significant evidentiary problems. No signs of a large-scale battle were found. No defensive structures showed signs of destruction. No evidence of fire was recorded, and no mass graves or remains bearing evidence of violence have been discovered. The orderly dismantling of the settlement structures is also inconsistent with the aftermath of a sudden assault. The third theory, abandonment due to famine or disease. This explanation rests on environmental and climatic evidence. Tree ring data from ancient oaks in the region reveal that Roanoke experienced a severe drought during the settlement's brief existence, possibly the worst in 800 years. Combined with limited food supplies and the colonists' difficulties adapting their farming techniques to the local soil and climate, starvation was a credible threat. Under such conditions, the colonists may have chosen to relocate in search of better resources. The strength of this theory lies in its alignment with the known subsistence challenges of the colony and the supporting environmental data. The weakness is the same as with other theories: the absence of concrete evidence indicating where they went, and the lack of material traces connecting any subsequent community to the Roanoke settlers. Peripheral theories. Alongside the three main hypotheses, several fringe theories have been proposed but are generally unsupported by serious scholarship. These include the notion that the colonists were captured and enslaved by another European power, that they migrated deep inland and were eventually absorbed into larger populations, or that supernatural forces, or a so-called Croatoan curse, played a role. These ideas persist largely within popular culture and folklore, fueled by the enduring mystery and the dramatic appeal of an unsolved disappearance. They tend to lack archaeological or documentary evidence and are not considered credible within academic circles. Overall assessment. From a historical perspective, all three major theories share one fundamental problem: the extreme scarcity of definitive evidence. The gap in available data is so substantial that any attempt at reconstruction must rely on conjecture supported only by indirect or circumstantial clues. The Roanoke case illustrates the limits of historical inquiry when faced with an absence of primary sources and verifiable physical remains. The one certainty is that the colony vanished sometime between 1587 and 1590, without leaving a clear record of what happened or where its inhabitants went. This reality has made the Roanoke colony one of the most persistent enigmas in American history, and a textbook example of an unresolved historical problem, one where definitive answers may never emerge unless entirely new and substantial evidence comes to light. The mystery of the Roanoke colony's fate has endured not simply because of a lack of evidence, but because it possesses all the conditions that make a historical event exceptionally difficult to resolve: an almost complete absence of records, a complex political and military context, and multiple competing explanations, none of which has decisive proof over the others. The fact that John White returned to the island only once, was unable to conduct a broader search, and never returned thereafter, severely limited the amount of direct testimony available. Contemporary maritime logs and administrative records provide no meaningful follow-up information, and later reports are largely speculative. Archaeological discoveries connected to the colony have been fragmentary and often inconclusive, offering few opportunities to establish a definitive narrative. As a result, Roanoke stands as a textbook example of what historians sometimes call incomplete history, where the gaps in the record are so large that they may never be filled. One reason the Roanoke mystery has retained such a strong hold on the public imagination is its symbolic place in the story of America's origins. It was the first English attempt at a permanent settlement in the New World, and its abrupt disappearance has become both a cautionary tale and a source of enduring curiosity. For professional historians, Roanoke is a reminder of the fragility of early colonial ventures in the face of environmental challenges, resource scarcity, and cultural conflict. For the general public, it is an open-ended story that invites speculation and inspires literature, television, and film. From an academic standpoint, the Roanoke case highlights methodological challenges that arise when primary sources are absent. Most modern hypotheses rely on indirect evidence, cross-referencing of contemporaneous accounts, and analogies to other colonial experiences of the same period. As such, conclusions about Roanoke have always been provisional and are subject to change should new evidence emerge. Over the past century, several archaeological projects have sought to uncover conclusive proof of the settlers' fate. These excavations have produced items such as pottery fragments, metal tools, and possible structural remains, but none has been definitively linked to the 1,587 settlers in a way that closes the debate. The absence of a single, decisive find has allowed the mystery to persist in its unresolved state. Another factor in the endurance of the Roanoke legend lies outside academic history. Since the 19th century, during the rise of romanticized historical narratives, the story of Roanoke has often been told in ways that emphasize the mysterious and the tragic. This tendency has blurred the boundary between evidence-based history and popular myth-making. The recurrence of the word Croatoan in unrelated anecdotes, many of which lack credible documentation, has contributed to the public perception of the colony's disappearance as something akin to a curse, rather than a problem of historical reconstruction. While such narratives help maintain popular interest, they also complicate the work of serious researchers, who must distinguish between folklore and verifiable data. In a broader sense, Roanoke underscores a reality of historical scholarship. Not every question has an answer, and uncertainty may be a permanent part of the record. For the history of the United States, the Roanoke episode serves as an enigmatic prologue to later, more successful settlements such as Jamestown. It illustrates that colonial success depended on a complex interplay of logistics, relations with indigenous communities, environmental conditions, and political stability, and that the breakdown of any one of these elements could result in complete failure. Ultimately, from a historian's perspective, Roanoke remains a dual symbol. For scholars, it is evidence of the limitations inherent in reconstructing the past when the trail of evidence runs cold. For the wider public, it is a story with no ending, offering just enough facts to be credible but leaving enough blanks to fuel endless speculation. This dual identity explains why, more than 4 centuries later, the Roanoke colony continues to fascinate, frustrate, and challenge both the historical profession and the public imagination, and why it remains one of the most enduring enigmas in American history. I spent the rest of that morning with the key tucked deep in my pocket, its weight a constant reminder of the decision I knew I was going to make. Every time I felt the metal against my leg, I pictured doors that led somewhere the soldiers didn't want us to see, doors like the one I'd found at the bottom of the stairs. After breakfast, the soldiers split us into small groups for what they called wellness checks. Erin and her daughter were taken to a separate area, and I found myself standing with Jeff, the guy from my neighborhood who'd argued with the soldiers about his dog, and a young woman I didn't recognize. They led us to a different building this time, smaller but still made of the same reinforced concrete. Inside, the walls were painted a pale, institutional green. The air smelled faintly of ammonia. The checkup was quick: blood pressure, a finger prick for blood, a series of strange questions about headaches, dizziness, or changes in sense of smell. The nurse, or whatever she was, didn't make eye contact, just wrote down my answers in neat block letters. When she was done, she nodded toward the door. Return to your quarters. But instead of heading straight back, I lagged behind my group, pretending to tie my shoe near a junction in the hallway. A soldier was stationed there, his rifle slung across his chest, but he was watching a pair of lab techs push a cart stacked with sealed metal cases. They disappeared through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." My fingers brushed the key in my pocket. I waited until the soldier turned his head, distracted by someone calling his name from the far end of the hall. The moment his attention shifted, I moved. Quiet, quick, slipping through the door before it closed all the way. The air on the other side was cooler, drier. The lighting was dimmer, casting long shadows down a corridor lined with heavy industrial doors. Each was numbered and had a simple keyhole beneath the handle. My pulse thudded in my ears as I tried the first door. The key didn't fit. The second, no luck. It was the third door where the key slid in smoothly and turned with a soft click. Inside was darkness. I stepped in and closed the door behind me, letting my eyes adjust. Gradually, the shapes in the room took form. Rows of metal shelving stretched from floor to ceiling, each stacked with file boxes, old equipment, and sealed plastic containers. A single desk sat against the far wall, papers scattered across its surface. I moved toward the desk, my hands trembling slightly. The papers weren't in any kind of order. Some were typed reports, others were handwritten notes in a scrawling script. The first page I picked up was dated 2 weeks ago. It described biological samples collected from multiple locations in our neighborhood. The language was clinical, almost cold, but certain words stood out: mutation, rapid progression, containment breach. My stomach tightened. The next sheet was worse. It was a map of our town marked with red circles around several blocks, including mine. Next to each circle was a code, the same in every case, Z13. I didn't know what it meant, but the repetition made my skin crawl. I was still staring at the map when I heard it, the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. I stuffed the papers back into a rough pile and ducked behind one of the shelving units, crouching low. The doorknob rattled once. Then silence. I held my breath. After what felt like a full minute, the footsteps receded. I stayed where I was, counting to 60 before daring to move. That's when I saw it. A large plastic container on the lowest shelf, half hidden behind a box of old binders. It was marked with the same biohazard symbol I'd seen the day before, but this one had a handwritten label. Recovered 8/14 Sector C. I slid it forward carefully. Inside, beneath a clear plastic lid, was something that made my skin prickle. It looked like a chunk of flesh, pale and misshapen, with dark veins threading through it. Except it wasn't rotting, it was twitching. A slow, almost imperceptible pulse, like it was still alive. A wave of nausea rose in my throat. I shoved the container back and closed the lid. I had to get out. I slipped the key back into my pocket, eased the door open, and glanced both ways before stepping into the corridor. No one was there. I walked quickly, trying not to look like I was running, until I was back in the main hallway. By the time I returned to our quarters, Erin was sitting on her cot, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Where were you?" she asked. "I got turned around after the checkup," I lied. Her eyes searched my face like she could see straight through me. That night, lying in the dark again, the hum outside felt louder than before, and every time it paused, I thought about the twitching thing in the container, the red circles on the map, and the label Sector C. I didn't know what they'd found in our neighborhood, but I knew it wasn't something they could explain away with words like precaution or safety. It was something they were afraid of. And now, so was I. The next day felt different from the moment I opened my eyes. It wasn't just the hum or the pulses that now seemed a little sharper in my ear. It was the way the soldiers moved. Tighter formations, more eyes sweeping the hallways. Conversations cut off the second you came within earshot. Whatever was coming in 2 days, they were already preparing for it. At breakfast, I scanned the room for the man in plain clothes. He wasn't there. Jeff sat alone again, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate. When I asked if he'd seen the guy, he shook his head. Haven't seen him since yesterday. If he's smart, he's keeping out of sight. After we ate, they herded us back to the dorms, but this time I noticed something new. 2 soldiers positioned at each end of the hallway, both with radios clipped to their shoulders. Every few minutes, a burst of static would spill from the radios, followed by short, coded phrases. I couldn't make out the words, but the urgency in the tone was obvious. Erin caught my arm as I passed her cot. "You're planning something," she said quietly. I froze. "I can see it in your face," she continued. "Just don't get yourself killed. Whatever this is, we need to survive it first." Her words stuck with me for the rest of the day. But survival didn't feel like enough anymore. Not when I knew there were answers hidden just beyond the locked doors and guarded hallways. That night I waited until the dorm was dark and the soldiers' footsteps had settled into their predictable rhythm. The earpiece was silent, but I decided not to wait for a signal. If we had only 2 days, I needed to know what we were up against. I slipped out into the hallway, moving toward the far end where I'd once seen a service door. To my surprise, it was unlocked. Beyond it, a narrow stairwell descended into darkness. The smell hit me first: damp concrete, faint traces of fuel, and something acrid I couldn't place. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a tunnel lined with thick cables running along the walls. Dim overhead bulbs cast long shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the floor under my boots. I followed the tunnel for what felt like several minutes before I saw it, light spilling through a partially open door. Peering inside, I froze. It was a control room. Banks of monitors displayed live feeds from cameras all over the facility. Hallways, dorms, even the dining hall. But it was the last row of screens that made my stomach drop. They weren't showing the facility. They were showing the outside, my neighborhood. Except it didn't look like my neighborhood anymore. The streets were empty, houses boarded up, yards overgrown. Military trucks were parked at every corner, and teams in hazmat suits moved from door to door, carrying equipment I didn't recognize. On one screen, a soldier used what looked like a handheld scanner on a front porch, then marked the door with a red X. And then I saw it on another camera feed in the backyard of the old Miller place. Something moved. It was quick, almost a blur, but I caught enough to know it wasn't a dog or a person. Too long in the limbs, too fast. The camera jerked suddenly, the image cutting to static. I barely had time to process it before I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to see a soldier in the doorway, his rifle raised. "Step away from the console," he ordered. My mind raced. If I was caught here, there'd be no talking my way out. But before I could move, another voice echoed from the hallway, a calm, almost amused tone. "Stand down, Sergeant. He's with me." It was the man in plain clothes. The soldier hesitated, then lowered his rifle and stepped aside. The man walked in, his hands in his pockets, and looked at the screens. "I see you've been doing a little sightseeing." I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. Not here, not now. If you want to know what's really going on, meet me at the generator room tomorrow night, alone." And just like that, he left. The soldier gave me one last hard stare before following him out, leaving me alone with the glow of the monitors and the faint hiss of static where the Miller feed had been. I slipped back into the tunnel, my mind churning. Tomorrow night. And maybe then I'd finally learn what they were hiding, what they were so afraid of in my neighborhood. The next day crawled by, every hour thick with the weight of anticipation. I went through the motions: meals, mandatory recreation time, the occasional health check, but my mind was fixed on the words from last night. Generator room, alone. I didn't tell Erin, not because I didn't trust her, but because if this went wrong, I didn't want her caught up in it. She already had her daughter to protect. The generator room was in a restricted section of the facility I'd never been to, but I'd seen the direction soldiers took when hauling fuel drums. I spent the day tracing their routes with my eyes, memorizing every door, every turn. Night finally came. The dorm fell into its shallow rhythm, breathing, shuffling, the occasional cough. The hum in the walls was louder than ever, but now I knew why. The generator wasn't just powering the facility, it was powering something else. I waited until the guard's footsteps fell into sync, then slipped out. My heart pounded as I moved down the hall, hugging the shadows. Past the dining hall, past the med bay, through a service corridor that reeked faintly of diesel. The generator room door was heavy steel, marked with hazard symbols and a small sign, "Authorized personnel only." When I pushed it open, heat and noise hit me like a wave. The massive machine inside roared with mechanical life, its pistons pumping, belts whirring. The air tasted of oil and metal, and there he was, the man in plain clothes, standing in the corner like he'd been waiting all night. "You came," he said, his voice almost lost in the roar. "I want answers," I replied. He nodded. "Then listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, but every word is true." I stepped closer, straining to hear over the generator's thrum. "This facility isn't about protecting you from a chemical spill or radiation or any of the crap they've been hinting at," he said. "It's about containment. Something got out in your neighborhood, something that wasn't supposed to exist outside of a lab. The military tried to isolate it, but they were too late." I thought of the twitching thing in the container, the red circles on the map, the blur on the camera feed. My stomach clenched. "What is it?" He hesitated. "It started as a research project, bioengineering for, let's call it enhanced adaptability, organisms that could survive extreme environments. But it didn't stop adapting. It learned. It grew." The noise of the generator seemed to fade as his words sank in. "They can mimic human tissue," he went on, "blend into environments. You've probably walked past one without realizing it. And the worst part, they don't just adapt physically, they adapt behaviorally. They learn from us." I felt a cold shiver slide down my spine. "That's what the Sector C designation means," he said. "Your block was flagged because they detected behavioral anomalies, things that didn't match human patterns. The evacuation wasn't for your safety. It was to make sure they had a controlled hunting ground." I opened my mouth to ask why they hadn't destroyed whatever these things were, but he shook his head. "They can't, or maybe they won't. There's a difference." The generator roared louder for a moment as if protesting the conversation. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. "In 2 nights they're going to burn Sector C. Everything, every house, every street, everyone still inside. Officially it'll be called a fire caused by structural collapse. Off the record it'll be a purge." My mind raced. and we're just supposed to sit here and watch. That's why I'm here, he said. There's a way out, but you'll have to trust me and you'll have to move fast. Before I could answer, the door banged open. Two soldiers stepped in, rifles ready. The man in plain clothes didn't even flinch. Inspection, one of them barked, eyes sweeping the room. He looked at me with a calm that made my skin crawl. We were just talking about power output, he said to them, making sure everything's in spec. The soldiers lingered a moment longer before turning and leaving. When the door shut, he leaned in. Tomorrow night, Northeast Gate, midnight. If you're not there, I'll assume you made your choice. Then he walked out, leaving me with the heat of the generator and the sound of my pulse hammering in my ears. Back in the dorm, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow night. A way out. But I couldn't stop thinking about the other thing he'd said, about walking past one of them without realizing it. And the thought I couldn't shake was this: what if I already had? The following day was the longest of my life. Every sound, every movement felt magnified. The soldiers were everywhere, patrolling the hallways, stationed at doors that had been unguarded before, stopping people mid-step to ask questions they already knew the answers to. Whatever was coming, it was closing in fast. I barely ate at breakfast, my stomach twisted into a knot. Jeff noticed. "You're pale," he said, sliding his tray closer. "What's wrong?" I thought about telling him everything. The man in plain clothes, the generator room, the plan to meet at the Northeast Gate. But the image of soldiers dragging him away if he slipped up stopped me cold. I forced a shrug. Didn't sleep well. By afternoon, the hum in the walls had changed. It was deeper now, almost like a heartbeat, with irregular bursts of the high-pitched pulses through my earpiece. I pressed it in tighter, hoping for a message, but all I got was static. The sun, or whatever passed for daylight in this place, had barely dipped when the atmosphere shifted again. More soldiers appeared in the corridors. They wore heavier gear now, helmets with tinted visors, rifles slung tight against their shoulders, and something else, black canisters clipped to their belts. I recognized the look of people ready for a fight. Dinner was tense. No one talked above a whisper. Erin kept glancing toward the soldiers stationed at the doors, her jaw tight. Her daughter sat beside her, fidgeting with a rubber band, blissfully unaware of the fear in the air. When night finally came, I waited until the dorm's breathing pattern settled. My heartbeat felt too loud, like it might give me away. I slipped on my boots and slid the earpiece in. The voice came almost immediately, low and urgent. "Go, Northeast Gate, now." I moved. Down the hall, past the sleeping quarters, past the darkened recreation room, past the med bay. Every step felt like it echoed, but no one stopped me. The service corridor to the northeast wing smelled faintly of diesel and something metallic, blood maybe. As I turned the last corner, I saw the gate. 2 layers of chain-link fence topped with razor wire, floodlights mounted high above, casting harsh white light on the gravel. And beyond the gate, in the shadows just out of reach of the light, he stood. The man in plain clothes. But we weren't alone. 2 soldiers stood at the gate, their rifles across their chests. The man approached them casually, speaking too low for me to hear. One soldier stepped aside to check something on a clipboard. The other turned toward me, his visor reflecting my own face back at me. My pulse spiked. This was it. The man signaled with the slightest tilt of his head. I walked forward, trying to look like I belonged there. The soldier with the clipboard barely glanced at me before unlocking the smaller pedestrian gate. We stepped out into the cool night air. The floodlights ended abruptly, and the world beyond was swallowed in darkness. "Keep close," he whispered. We moved quickly, our footsteps crunching on gravel until we reached the tree line. The hum from the facility grew fainter behind us, replaced by the distant chirp of night insects. For the first time in days, I could smell earth and leaves instead of disinfectant and oil. But freedom didn't taste the way I thought it would. The darkness ahead felt alive, watching. We followed a narrow path through the trees, the moon barely filtering through the branches. Every so often he'd stop and listen, tilting his head like he could hear something I couldn't. After about 15 minutes, we reached a small clearing. In the center sat a black SUV with tinted windows. He opened the back door and gestured for me to get in. The moment I sat down, I noticed the smell, faint but familiar. That same acrid chemical scent from the tunnels under the facility. He slid in beside me. "We have a short window," he said. "They'll realize you're gone soon." The driver, a woman in dark tactical gear, started the engine. We pulled away, the forest swallowing the noise behind us. I was about to ask where we were going when something flashed in the trees. At first, I thought it was an animal's eyes reflecting the headlights. But then it moved fast on two legs, its body unnaturally fluid. The driver cursed under her breath. "We've got a tail." The man leaned forward. "Punch it." The SUV roared down the narrow dirt track, branches whipping against the sides. I turned in my seat just in time to see the shape break from the trees and leap onto the road behind us. It was tall, too tall for a person, and its limbs were wrong. Too long, too thin, bending in ways they shouldn't. Its skin, or whatever covered it, gleamed wetly in the headlights. And then it moved, faster than I thought possible, closing the distance. The driver swerved hard, the tires spitting gravel. "Can't lose it in the woods," she shouted over the engine. "Then we make a stand," the man said. Before I could protest, he reached for the black canister at his belt, yanked the pin, and tossed it out the window. A burst of white vapor exploded behind us, swallowing the thing in an instant. For a moment, I thought it had worked. But then the vapor shifted, and I saw movement still coming. "Hold on," the driver yelled, and the SUV shot forward into the night. Whatever was out there, it wasn't going to stop. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe the facility hadn't been a prison after all. Maybe it had been the only thing keeping them out. The SUV tore through the forest road, engine growling like it was straining against its own limits. The night outside was a blur of black trunks and silver streaks of moonlight, branches whipping against the windshield with sharp cracks. Every bump in the dirt track rattled my bones, but I couldn't look away from the rear window. The thing was still there. It ran on all fours now, its movements jerky yet terrifyingly fast. Every few strides it would lurch upright, as if testing how close it could get before it lunged. Its eyes, or what I thought were eyes, flashed pale in the dark, not with light but with a kind of reflection like oil slicks catching the moon. "Faster!" the man in plain clothes shouted. The driver's jaw was tight, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. "We're already pushing it," she said through gritted teeth. "Road's narrowing. Any faster and we'll roll." I felt the SUV fishtail slightly on a sharp bend, the tires spitting gravel into the dark. Behind us, the creature shifted its gait again, moving like liquid poured into a shape too big for its container. It was closing in. "Left up ahead," the man said, pointing. The driver yanked the wheel. We veered onto an even narrower path, this one barely wide enough for the SUV. Branches clawed at the sides, the headlights catching glimpses of something metallic embedded in the trees. Old warning signs, faded and rusted, their words long unreadable. The hum I'd grown used to at the facility was gone now, replaced by the raw roar of the engine and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then, just as I thought we might pull ahead, the thing vanished from view. "Where is it?" I asked, craning my neck toward the rear window. "Don't look for it," the man said quickly. "If you don't see it, it's because it's moving around us." The driver's eyes flicked to the mirrors. "We've got movement on the right flank." Something slammed into the passenger side of the SUV, hard enough to shove us toward the embankment. The vehicle shuddered, tires scraping against the edge before the driver fought it back onto the track. "It's trying to push us off the road," she yelled. The man pulled a second canister from his belt. "When I say open your window and throw this straight down," he told me. My hands felt clumsy as I took it, the metal cool against my palm. "What is it?" "Doesn't matter," he said, "just trust me." The sound came again, thuds against the side, like someone pounding on the metal with inhuman strength. Then a flash of movement in the corner of my eye, a blur racing alongside us, its limbs moving in ways that made my stomach twist. "Now!" he shouted. I rolled down the window, the rush of cold night air hitting me like a slap. I hurled the canister straight down into the darkness. A heartbeat later, it erupted in a blinding blue-white flash. The creature screamed, or maybe the sound just tore through my head like feedback, and stumbled, its body twisting violently as if trying to shake something off. The SUV surged forward, putting distance between us. "That won't hold it for long," the man said, breathing hard. "We need to get to the highway. Once we hit open ground, we've got a better shot." The driver nodded, her eyes scanning the narrowing path ahead. 2 miles, maybe less. Those 2 miles felt like 20. Every sound, every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush sent adrenaline spiking through my veins. I kept expecting it to burst from the trees again, faster and angrier than before. When we finally broke out of the forest, the sudden openness was almost blinding. The moon hung low over a strip of cracked asphalt stretching into the distance. The driver gunned the engine, and the SUV leapt forward onto the highway. For a moment, there was nothing but the wind rushing past and the sound of the tires on the road. Then, far behind us, I saw it step out of the tree line. It didn't run this time. It just stood there watching us go, its head tilted slightly like it was memorizing the shape of us. I shivered. Why isn't it chasing us? The man didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. "Because it doesn't have to." The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean?" "They learn," he said. "That one just figured out something new. It's not about catching us tonight, it's about knowing where we'll be tomorrow." No one spoke after that. The SUV sped down the empty highway, the darkness pressing in on either side, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't escaped at all. We'd just been released. The SUV sped down the cracked, lonely highway, its headlights cutting through the darkness in 2 sharp beams. I kept glancing back through the rear window, half expecting to see that thing still standing there, or worse, running behind us again. But the road stayed empty. That somehow made it worse. The man in plain clothes sat forward in his seat, watching the road ahead with an intensity that made me uneasy. The driver's hands were steady on the wheel, but her eyes flicked to the mirrors every few seconds. "We're not going back to the facility, are we?" I asked finally. "No," the man said flatly. "That place is compromised. Once it saw you, there was no point." "What do you mean, saw me?" He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "They learn faster when they fixate on a target. You made eye contact. That's all it needs." The driver glanced at me in the mirror, her brow creasing. We need to change locations every few hours. If it locks on, it'll track you anywhere. These things can cover ground you wouldn't believe. A cold weight settled in my chest. So what? I marked. The man didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to a faint glow on the horizon. Towns ahead. We'll resupply, then move again. The highway curved and soon streetlights appeared, dim, flickering orange pools along a two-lane road. The place looked dead. No cars, no movement, just shuttered storefronts and the occasional boarded-up window. We pulled up in front of what used to be a gas station. The pumps were gone, the sign hanging by a single rusted chain. The driver killed the engine. 10 minutes, the man said, stepping out. Grab water, fuel cans, anything portable. I followed him inside. The place smelled of dust and old paper. Shelves stood half empty, the few remaining items long past their expiration dates. I grabbed a couple of bottles of water, some protein bars, and a flashlight that still worked. The man was at the counter, flipping through a faded road atlas. "We can take Route 19 north, then cut west," he muttered. "If we stay off the main routes, it'll slow it down." I was about to ask how he was so sure of its movements when the driver's voice came sharply from outside. "Lights off. Now." We killed the flashlight and ducked behind the counter. Through the dusty front window I saw it, far down the street under the flickering orange glow of a street lamp. The creature. It wasn't moving, just standing there, head tilted slightly like it was listening to something only it could hear. Even at that distance, I could see the unnatural length of its limbs, the way its posture shifted subtly, like it couldn't decide which shape to settle into. "How?" I started, but the man cut me off. "It followed us here, probably cut across the woods while we stuck to the road." The driver slipped back inside, her breathing fast. "We can't make it to the SUV without passing through its line of sight." "Then we don't go to the SUV," the man said. "What are you talking about?" I asked. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket. "This gas station has a service bay. The back exit leads to an alley that runs parallel to Main Street. We take that, circle around, and find another vehicle." I hesitated, glancing toward the front window. The thing had moved. Closer now. Its head twitched slightly as if sniffing the air. "Move," the man said. We slipped through the service bay, the smell of oil and rust heavy in the air. The back door groaned as we pushed it open. The alley beyond was narrow, choked with weeds and litter. We kept low, moving quickly but quietly. Halfway down the alley we heard it. Not footsteps, something worse. The sound of joints bending where they shouldn't. A wet clicking noise like bones snapping back into place. "It's behind us," the driver whispered. We broke into a run. The alley opened onto another street lined with dark houses. The man led us to an old pickup truck parked half on the curb. He slid the key into the door, muttering, "Knew this would still be here." The engine coughed, then roared to life. We piled in and the truck shot forward, tires squealing. I looked back just in time to see the creature emerge from the alley. For the first time, I saw it clearly under the streetlight and wished I hadn't. Its skin wasn't skin at all, but something shifting, like it was made of threads pulling tight and loosening again. Its face, or what passed for one, kept rearranging, flashes of human features appearing and disappearing too quickly to recognize. It stepped into the street, tilting its head at us in that same slow, deliberate way. Then it moved, not running but gliding forward, as if the ground itself was carrying it. The truck roared down the road, the headlights bouncing on cracked asphalt. I couldn't tell if we were gaining ground or if it was just letting us go again. The man didn't take his eyes off the road. "This isn't over. It's not going to stop, not until one of us is gone. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. Then we make sure it's not us. No one spoke after that. The night closed in around us again, and I realized that maybe the worst part wasn't the creature itself. It was knowing that it was always out there somewhere, learning, waiting for the right moment. And the moment it decided to move again, nowhere would be safe. We didn't stop driving until the town had disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the black horizon. The old pickup rattled on every bump, but the steady thrum of the engine was almost comforting, something solid in a night that seemed to shift around us. The man in plain clothes, who I'd started to think of as our unwilling leader, kept scanning the roadside. The driver kept the headlights low, so we wouldn't be visible from too far away. That meant every shadow beyond the glass could have been hiding something. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked after what felt like an hour of silence. "Someplace it won't expect," he said. "That doesn't sound very specific." He finally looked at me. "Specificity gets you killed. Patterns get you killed. You move like prey, it hunts you like prey. You move like something else, you stand a chance." That wasn't comforting. The driver slowed as the road narrowed into an unmarked gravel path, flanked by trees so thick they blocked the moonlight. We bumped along for maybe another half-mile before the truck stopped beside what looked like the ruins of a barn. "This is it," I said, glancing at the collapsed roof and leaning walls. "For now," he said, getting out. "Help me with the tarp in the back. We'll hide the truck, cut the lights." The driver and I helped pull the heavy tarp over the truck, weighing the corners with cinder blocks. The air was colder here, and the silence felt unnatural, like even the insects were holding their breath. Inside the barn, the air smelled of damp wood and old hay. We set up in a corner where the roof was still intact. The driver unrolled a sleeping bag while the man pulled something from his jacket pocket. A small handheld radio, scuffed and patched with electrical tape. He turned it on, and the speaker hissed with static. "We'll see if anyone's still out there," he said, adjusting the dial slowly. "What do you mean, anyone?" I asked. "Others like us," he said. "People who got out, people who know what's coming." For a long while there was nothing but the soft rise and fall of static. Then a burst, 3 sharp clicks followed by a pause, then 2 more clicks. He leaned forward, his expression sharpening. "They're alive." "Who?" He ignored me, sending 3 clicks back. The radio stayed silent for a moment before a voice, low and broken by static, came through. "Safe for now. Keep moving, it adapts." The driver met my eyes. "They're talking about it." Before I could ask how they knew, another voice cut in, this one higher, urgent. "Southbound, 20 miles, intersection of 41 and 7, shelter." The man nodded. "That's our next stop." But the first voice came back, strained now. "You're marked. It knows, don't." The transmission cut out mid-sentence, replaced by a rising whine of static. The sound made the hairs on my arms stand up. The man shut off the radio. "We leave before sunrise." Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the barn's wood sounded like footsteps outside. Every rustle in the grass sent my pulse into overdrive. At one point I thought I saw a shadow move in the gap under the barn door, but when I blinked it was gone. Just before dawn the man shook me awake. "We're moving." The driver had the tarp off the truck in minutes. We rolled back onto the gravel path, turning toward the highway. The sky was just starting to lighten when the driver slowed suddenly. "Look." In the middle of the road ahead, something had been laid out, an arrangement of stones, perfectly round, forming a symbol I didn't recognize. It was about the size of a car hood, every stone evenly spaced. We stopped a good 20 feet away. That wasn't here before, I said. It's a warning, the man said quietly, or a claim. Before I could ask what he meant, we heard it, faint at first, then growing louder, a distant clicking sound like the noise it made when its joints moved, echoing from somewhere behind us. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. It's following again. The man's eyes scanned the tree line. No, it's hurting us. That was worse. The driver floored it, swerving around the circle of stones and gunning the engine down the road. But the feeling that we were being funneled somewhere wouldn't leave me. When we hit the intersection of 41 and 7, I saw it, a concrete bunker half buried in the side of a hill, its steel door painted with a faded red cross. The man jumped out first, pounding on the door in a strange rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. The door creaked open just enough for a pair of eyes to appear. "You brought it," a voice said from the darkness. "No choice," the man replied. "We need inside." The door opened wider, revealing a narrow hallway lit by a single dangling bulb. We stepped in, and the steel door slammed shut behind us with a heavy clang. For the first time all night, I felt a flicker of relief. But it didn't last, because in the faint light I saw something carved into the wall. A crude outline of the creature's shape, long limbs, shifting head, and beneath it 3 words scratched deep into the concrete. The steel door sealed behind us with a metallic echo that seemed to stretch into the concrete walls. The air inside was cold and heavy, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and rusted metal. A single flickering bulb cast long shadows across the narrow hallway, making the carved words, "Nowhere is safe," seem like they were breathing. The man in plain clothes didn't flinch. He stepped past it, motioning for the driver and me to follow. The figure who had let us in, a wiry man with hollow cheeks and sharp, watchful eyes, closed the door's heavy locking mechanisms with practiced movements. I counted 4 separate bolts sliding into place. "You're lucky you made it here before sunrise," the wiry man said, his voice low but urgent. "Once the light's gone, the ground out there isn't ours anymore." The driver tilted her head. "Whose is it then?" The wiry man didn't answer right away. He just gestured for us to keep moving. The hallway opened into a larger chamber, lit by a mix of bare bulbs and the pale glow of battery-powered lanterns. A long table sat in the middle, covered with maps, radios, and scattered handwritten notes. On one wall, an old chalkboard was covered with sketches of the creature, dozens of them, each slightly different, like whoever drew them was trying to capture something that kept changing. There were 5 other people here, all wearing the same tight, guarded expression I'd seen in the wiry man's face. A woman with streaks of gray in her hair was sorting through a box of canned goods. A younger man sat by a radio, headphones pressed to his ears, scribbling something onto a notepad. "This is our safe point," the wiry man said. "We don't stay long, but it's where we regroup, share information, and decide who's still alive." I glanced at the chalkboard. "You've seen it too." "Seen it." The wiry man's mouth tightened. "It's taken more from us than I care to count." The man in plain clothes moved to the table, scanning the maps. "You've been tracking it." The wiry man nodded. "We log every sighting, every sound, every variation. It's not the same from one night to the next. That's why your message about being marked worried me." The driver stepped closer. "If it's marked him, can we shake it?" The wiry man's eyes softened, but not in a hopeful way. "You don't shake it. You either outrun it, or you make sure it doesn't want you anymore. Both options are bad." The woman with gray hair set down her box of cans. "It's not just about you. Once it's on someone, it changes how it moves. It uses them, forces them into places they wouldn't normally go, places it's prepared. That sent a chill down my spine. Prepared like traps. Worse, she said simply. The younger man at the radio looked up suddenly. We've got chatter. Sector 3, multiple clicks all moving south. The wiry man's face darkened. Sector 3 is less than 10 miles from here. The man in plain clothes turned to him. We'll move before nightfall. Give us everything you have: routes, choke points, fallback positions. The wiry man hesitated, then reached under the table, pulling out a battered metal case. Inside was a stack of folded maps, some marked in thick red lines, others covered in handwritten notes. "This is the best we've got," he said. "But if it's adapting as fast as you say, none of this may matter for long." While they talked strategy, I wandered to the chalkboard. The sketches showed the creature in different forms, one hunched and skeletal, another taller with elongated arms, another with its head split into two twisting shapes. The last drawing caught my eye. It was almost human, wearing what looked like the shredded remains of a coat. The gray-haired woman noticed me staring. "That one's the worst. When it looks human, people let it get closer." A sharp metallic clang echoed through the hallway we'd come from. Everyone froze. The wiry man signaled for silence, moving toward the sound. He switched off the nearest light, and one by one the others followed. The room sank into shadow, lit only by the faint glow of the radios. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate scrape along the steel door. The younger man at the radio whispered, "It's daylight. It shouldn't be here." The wiry man's jaw clenched. "It learns." We stood in silence, listening to that scraping move from one side of the door to the other. Then it stopped. For a moment, the only sound was my own breathing, too loud in the stillness. Then 3 knocks, not pounding, not urgent, just 3 steady, almost polite knocks. The wiry man's face went pale. "It's not trying to get in, it's telling us it knows where we are." The man in plain clothes spoke quietly. "Then we're leaving now." The wiry man shook his head. "If we open that door, we might walk right into it." The driver spoke for the first time in minutes. "If we stay, we're cornered." The tension in the room was a living thing, pressing against my chest. Finally, the wiry man gave a curt nod. "Gear up. We're gone in 5. As they scrambled to gather supplies, I looked back at the words carved into the wall, "Nowhere is safe," and realized they weren't a warning. They were a fact. The room exploded into movement the moment the wiry man gave the order. Backpacks were thrown open, supplies crammed inside with no thought for neatness, just speed. The driver swept the maps off the table, rolling them into a tight cylinder and shoving them into her pack. The man in plain clothes double-checked the handgun at his hip, then took a sawed-off shotgun from the rack on the wall. I didn't know what I was supposed to do except try not to get in the way. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else, until I realized it wasn't just my heartbeat I was hearing, it was the metallic scrape again. This time it was closer. The wiry man froze halfway through stuffing a first aid kit into his bag. Everyone stopped moving at once. The sound was traveling, not along the door now, but along the side wall. A deep, resonant thud shook the concrete as if something massive had leaned against it. The driver muttered, "How the hell is it doing that in daylight?" No one answered. The wiry man signaled for us to move toward the back exit. It wasn't a proper door, just a heavy steel hatch that led to a narrow maintenance tunnel. He pulled it open, and the cold air rushing in was like a slap to the face. We filed in one by one, the walls so tight we had to move in single file. The darkness here was different, thicker, heavier. The driver's flashlight beam cut through it, but the circle of light felt like the only real thing in a world of shifting shadows. "Where does this lead?" I whispered. "Drainage ditch half a mile out," the wiry man replied. "From there, we split up and regroup at the old water tower." Half a mile sounded manageable until I realized that anything following us would hear every footstep echoing off these concrete walls. Somewhere behind us, something scraped against the tunnel wall. We moved faster. The tunnel bent left, then right, the turns sharp and sudden, designed to slow down water flow, but they also slowed us. The driver nearly slipped on the damp floor, catching herself against the wall with a muffled grunt. Then ahead of us, light, dim and gray, filtering through a wide, grated opening. The wiry man reached it first, pulling a crowbar from his pack. He wedged it into the bolts holding the grate and began to pry. That's when we heard it. Not the clicking, not the scraping. Breathing. Long, slow, deliberate inhalations echoing in the tunnel behind us. The wiry man hissed, "It's in here." The grate gave way with a metallic groan and cold daylight poured in. One by one, we climbed out into the drainage ditch, boots sinking into mud. The driver turned back to help me up, and in that split second I saw movement in the darkness of the tunnel. It was close enough now that the flashlight beam caught it just for an instant. Its form shifted, edges blurring like heat distortion, but I saw the suggestion of a face. A face I recognized. It was mine. The driver yanked me up before I could react, and the wiry man kicked the grate back into place. We didn't wait to see if it would hold. The ditch led us to an overgrown field, the grass high enough to brush against our waists. The sky was overcast now, a dull gray that made it hard to tell what time it was. "Water towers this way," the wiry man said, pointing to a break in the tree line. We moved quickly, but every step felt like we were walking in open crosshairs. There was no cover, no walls, no door we could bolt shut. Just sky and grass and the uneasy feeling that the ground itself might give way beneath us. Halfway across the field, I looked back. The grate was gone, not open, gone as if it had never been there. "We need to move faster," the driver said, her voice shaking. The wiry man set the pace, and soon we reached the trees. The water tower rose above them, its rusted frame and peeling paint looking almost alien against the muted sky. At the base of the tower, 3 figures stepped out from behind the support beams. They were armed rifles, shotguns, and one with a crossbow. The tallest of them, a man with a beard gone mostly white, called out, "Who's marked?" No one answered. He looked at each of us in turn, then his gaze stopped on me. "It's you." The wiry man stepped forward. "We can still outrun it if we move." "You don't outrun something that can be you," the bearded man interrupted. The words landed like ice water in my stomach. The man in plain clothes raised his voice. "We don't have time for this. We need shelter before nightfall." The bearded man shook his head. "Shelter doesn't matter anymore. If it's already wearing his face, it's not outside anymore." The silence that followed was worse than the scraping, worse than the breathing. Because in that moment, I understood what he meant. If it could take my face, it could be anywhere, even standing right next to me. The forest thinned as we approached the old mill. Its skeletal frame rose above the trees, blackened wood and rusted metal silhouetted against a bleeding orange sky. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the dry, hollow rattle of loose tin panels clinging to the roof. The bearded man stopped just short of the clearing. "We go in quiet," he said, his voice low. "Sound carries here, and if it's in the building—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The wiry man took the lead. weaving us between broken machinery and heaps of splintered lumber. The mill had been dead for decades, but it still smelled faintly of sawdust, a ghost scent that made the place feel like it was holding onto something long gone. Inside, the air was cooler and darker. The driver's flashlight swept across warped support beams and the tangled mess of conveyor belts overhead. The silence was thick enough to feel against my skin, as if the building itself was listening. The bearded man motioned for us to spread out and check for open exits. His people moved with military precision, one checking the rear loading bay, another climbing a rotting staircase to the catwalks. The wiry man unrolled a smaller map, laying it across a toppled workbench. "We'll move through the sublevel," he said. "Drainage tunnels run under here. If we can make it to the far end, we'll come up near the ridge. That'll give us cover until we reach the highway." I didn't like the idea of another tunnel, not after what happened in the last one, but before I could say anything, something caught my eye. High on the far wall, half hidden by shadow, was a smear, dark, wet. I moved closer. It wasn't paint. It was blood, fresh. And below it, scrawled into the dust with a fingertip, "You're getting warmer." My breath caught. I turned to call out, but stopped when I saw the driver watching me from across the room. Her expression was unreadable, her hands shoved deep into her jacket pockets. The wiry man noticed my hesitation. "What is it?" I pointed at the wall. By the time he looked, the words were gone, just smooth, undisturbed dust. The bearded man reappeared from the shadows, his face tight. "Loading bays sealed. Only way out is down." We gathered at a trapdoor in the center of the floor. The bearded man pried it open, and the smell hit instantly. Damp stone, stagnant water, and something else underneath. Something metallic and sour. The wiry man went first, climbing down the rusted ladder into the dark. One by one, the rest followed until it was just me and the driver left at the top. "You saw something, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I swallowed. "It was a message. I think it was for me." "Then it's not following us anymore," she said. "It's leading us." The thought lodged in my mind like a splinter. We descended into the tunnels, our footsteps echoing off slick stone walls. The ceiling was low, forcing us to hunch as we moved. Water dripped from somewhere above, each drop a sharp, cold reminder of the weight of earth pressing down on us. Halfway through, the lead flashlight flickered. The wiry man slapped the casing, and it steadied, just long enough for us to see the shape ahead. At first I thought it was a person, tall, thin, standing perfectly still in the middle of the tunnel. Then the light caught its face. It was mine again. But this time it was perfect, every detail right down to the scar on my chin, and it smiled. The wiry man raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the thing stepped backward into the dark and was gone. We stood frozen for what felt like minutes, the silence pressing in until the bearded man barked, "Move." We pushed on, faster now, until a faint light appeared ahead. Relief surged through me, an exit. The wiry man was the first up the ladder, then the bearded man, then the driver. I was halfway up when I heard it again. Breathing. Right below me. Slow, steady, patient. I climbed faster, my hands slipping on the damp rungs. The driver reached down, grabbing my wrist and hauling me out into the open air. We were in the middle of a ridge, the forest stretching out below. The sun was gone now, the first stars pricking through the deep blue sky. The wiry man closed the hatch behind us, locking it with a length of chain. "We keep moving," he said. "No stops until we're on the highway." But as we started down the ridge, I realized something that turned my stomach cold. In the moment she'd pulled me up, the driver had smiled. And it wasn't her smile. It was mine. We moved fast down the ridge, the crunch of loose rock under our boots the only sound. The air was cold now, sharp in my lungs, and the darkness between the trees felt thicker than it should have been. The wiry man kept glancing over his shoulder as if counting us, making sure no one had slipped away or been replaced. The highway was supposed to be less than an hour away. An hour of keeping my eyes forward, an hour of pretending I didn't notice the driver's stolen smile, an hour of ignoring the crawling sense in my spine that something in our group was wrong. The bearded man led us into a narrow gully, its sides steep enough to block the wind. "We'll take this to the overpass," he said, "quieter than walking the ridge." Quieter, yes, but also boxed in. The gully twisted like a dry riverbed, the rocks damp from recent rain. The flashlight beams danced over moss-covered stones and patches of shadow too deep to see into. Every so often, one of those shadows seemed to move just a fraction of a second too late, like it was pretending to be still. Halfway through, the wiry man froze. His light was fixed on something ahead, scratches in the rock wall, not random marks. Letters, the same jagged hand as before, almost home. The bearded man muttered something under his breath. No one asked him to repeat it. We kept moving, faster now. My boots slipped on wet stone and the driver caught my arm before I fell. For just a second our faces were inches apart, and I saw it. The eyes were mine, not just in color, not just in shape, mine. The same faint redness in the corners, the same tired lines from nights without sleep. They blinked in perfect sync with mine, as if they'd been watching every movement for days. I jerked my arm free. She didn't stop smiling. The gully opened into a stretch of open ground. In the distance, the highway, a thin, silver line under the pale glow of a single street light. Relief flared in my chest, until the wiry man said, "Count off." One by one we gave our numbers. When it got to me, I said 4. And then a half-second later, from somewhere behind me, 4. We spun around. There were 2 of me. The other me stood just beyond the circle of flashlight beams, face calm, hands loose at its sides. No weapon, no aggression, just watching. The wiry man raised his gun. The bearded man shouted, "Don't shoot. You won't know which is which if you miss." The thing tilted its head, a mirror of my own nervous tick. And then it spoke, my voice exactly right. "Don't shoot, you might hit the wrong one." The driver stepped forward. "There's a way to tell." Her hand slipped into her jacket pocket. I tensed. But instead of the smoke powder from before, she pulled out a small hunting knife. She tossed it between us, the blade sticking into the dirt. "Cut your palm," she said. "Both of you." My throat tightened. I knew why. The bearded man had said earlier that the thing could copy everything, but not what was inside. If it bled different, they'd know. I knelt, picked up the knife, and dragged it across my palm. Blood welled instantly, warm and red in the cold night air. The other me knelt too, drew the blade across its palm, and bled the exact same way. No one moved. The wiry man's voice was tight. "That's not possible." The other me smiled, not the strained, wary smile I'd been wearing for days, but a wide, perfect grin. Then it said, "Almost home," and ran. We chased it across the open ground toward the highway, the crunch of gravel deafening in the night. It moved like me, every stride, every breath, but faster, smoother, as if I'd been holding back my whole life without knowing it. It reached the streetlight first, stopped under it, turned. And now there were 3 of us. The wiry man stopped short, gun shaking. The bearded man swore under his breath. The driver looked at me, her real eyes, or were they, wide. "We can't win this." The streetlight flickered, and when it came back there were 4, all of them me. The bearded man fired first, but the bullets did nothing. They didn't even flinch. One of them stepped forward, close enough now for me to see the tiny scar on its chin. My scar, it whispered, still behind you. I spun around, and the last thing I saw before everything went dark was my own face, smiling. Some say the highway patrol found nothing that night. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. Others say they saw a group walking the ridge just before dawn, 5 figures in total, all of them the same,